Hey guys, welcome back to Honey in the Rock, episode 48. I'm Sophie, and today I have Miss Allison on with me. So we're going to be talking about the season of heartbreak or singleness. Someone asked for an episode like this, and I had no experience in that. What I just said was, if you've never dated anybody, you can't have experience on how to heal after that. So had to recruit in some help. And so Miss Allison is going to just share her wisdom and what she's been through to hopefully help and encourage other people. So thank you for coming on.
Thank you for having me. It's definitely wisdom of things to avoid. So
Right. And so also, if I ever have a technical difficulty, this is Miss Allison is who I text, because this is like her job is to be the one behind the scenes of the podcast. So today she's in front of the camera. And so you wouldn't have seen 2 weeks ago episode. You would just not have seen that if it weren't for her. So she is the background girl, even, in my little tiny thing that I have so many random questions. So just to start off, what is your testimony?
So I grew up in church. My family, my mom and dad let me back up. I grew up in church. My mom and dad put a lot of emphasis on the importance of being there and developing a relationship with God. And I was actually saved when I was about 7 or 8.
Yeah.
And I remember having questions and my parents not really being able to answer them. They knew the knowledge, but I guess as a kid, you're diving like deep into things and asking the what ifs. And so I was very fortunate that my grandfather was a Baptist minister. And so I was actually saved in the church that he was preaching at the time.
Oh, sweet.
And I was always really active in the youth group at my church, and went to events and had good friends and made good decisions. And like a lot of people, I moved away to go to school, and that little bit of freedom is what sent me in another direction. I had some great friends that I really enjoyed being around. They weren't the best influences, and I got into partying and drinking, and I became somebody that I knew that's not who I should be, and that's not who God had designed me to be. Through several instances of God trying to get my attention, and I'll go into some of that and some of the relationships that I was in. God finally got my attention when I moved away from Nashville, away from those friends, away from that scene, and I was living in Danville, Virginia, and it is. I think the entire population of that city is like 30,000 people.
Oh.
So it was a much different landscape and area than Nashville was. And God finally got my attention. And, from that moment forward, I remember hitting my knees in the kitchen floor and just begging him, for forgiveness for the way that I've lived my life, the way that I had allowed temptation and sin to transform me. And since then, I have tried every day. I don't get it right a lot of days, but since then I have tried every day to lead a life that would be honoring and pleasing to God, and to, again, even my failures, use those as learning opportunities to hopefully share that with other people so they don't make the same ones.
Right. That's so good. I think a couple of my friends have gone into that season of moving away from home, going into college or whatever that looks like next. And it is such a hard time. You're either going to figure out immediately, oh, this is where I stand, or you're going to just quickly get swayed in, but to see how faithful the Lord is to pull you back home and continue to chase after you. That's what's so cool, that part of your story and different parts of mine. It's where the Lord, I wasn't chasing the Lord, but he was chasing after me, just waiting for me to come home. We read the story in Sunday school to the little kids, and we were talking about the parable where the son runs away from the father and spends all this money, and then it's oh my goodness, what happens? He was came home to be a servant. He was I will eat the pigs. I'd rather have what they're eating. I just want to serve you. And the dad came home, and he saw his son coming. They just ran to each other, and he was get him the best clothes, get him this. He's oh, I'll be a servant. He's no, you are my son in your home. And just to see how much more Jesus is running after us.
Absolutely.
That seems the best thing ever, but even more how Jesus is doing so.
Oh, absolutely. Because I was chasing, the next party and it was never an issue with alcohol that I had. I just really liked going to parties, and I really liked, the people, who were there, and I think because of a lot of insecurities that I had, I liked the person I became when I was drinking, even though that was nowhere near the best version of myself. You know, just being young and dumb and in my 20s. And, you know, and my parents, like, you know, we were not sheltered really by any means, but, you know, my parents don't drink and we didn't grow up with alcohol in the house. So it was kind of a new experience to be able to make decisions for myself for the first time. And so I definitely did not make the best ones.
No. Well, so next, will you share a time where you either got broken up with or broke up with somebody that you thought you were going to marry, or you thought this is the best thing ever? You don't have to share whatever you feel comfortable, but something like a part of kind of like that.
Yeah. So I didn't date a lot when I was in college. I didn't date seriously. I dated a lot of casual dating because I didn't really want to settle down. I had decided I was never getting married and never having kids. And but it was so funny because I remember, you know, there are a couple of guys I can think of off the top of my head that we both were, you know, in the same flight. We weren't looking for serious relationships. But even that in my mind, I had convinced myself that's okay. He's not looking for a serious relationship and I'm not looking for one, but I'm going to change his mind and he's going to change mine. And then we're going to have this whole fairy tale romance and get married. And then, you know, I'll be able to get him in church and I'll get my life right and we'll get his life right. And of course that never happened because you can't change people. But there was one guy that I really, I say fell in love with. I think for what that version of like a 23-year-old who had never been in a serious relationship before fell in love with. And I just knew that, you know, we were really good friends and I just knew this was going to go somewhere. And we had kind of flirted back and forth with it for a little while. And it just kind of fizzled out. And I remember I was devastated and I had one of these psycho moments I'm not proud of, where I sent him this really long message and I'm like, what the heck? You know, I thought we were friends. Like I really cared about you. And you know, and we've not spoken since then. I can't really say that I blame him. I mean, you know, and I look back at all those instances now, or the few, you know, random dates I might have had with one guy, and I would always put my eggs in that basket thinking, okay, this has to be him. This has to be him. This has to be him. You know, not knowing it, obviously 23, 24, that my, you know, the person God had designed for me wasn't coming along until much, much later. And, you know, and I'm thankful for those opportunities. I'm thankful for that stupidity of being able to walk in and think that I'm going to change somebody. I learned a lot from it. I learned a lot from, you know, watching a relationship fail, you know, and I mean, God says in his words, you know, that we are designed to be equally yoked, and it matters. It matters tremendously. And I'm thankful now that none of those relationships ever work out.
And you see the Lord's faithfulness in that. Even like, I think that's something that I struggle with, like, oh, well, I can fix them. Or when we start dating, like, he'll start reading his Bible then. And then he's going to be so serious about Jesus. But then when we stop talking and he stops reading his Bible, like, and so you can't change somebody. You can, like, encourage people.
Absolutely.
But you're not going to change where someone's heart is at.
Absolutely.
That's what Jesus is going to do. Okay, so then after a breakup, after, you know, you felt heartbroken, how did you find joy after that? Because you kind of talked about how you put all your eggs in one basket.
Yes.
So maybe don't put all your eggs in one basket. Like, hey, I can date this person, and I also can see my friends, and I also can go to my church still. But after, like, so that probably would help a little bit. But also, like, just finding joy after feeling like you've lost it all.
So I think the biggest thing, one, is definitely, you know, when you meet somebody and you begin dating them, the one thing that I never did that I should have, and it was because of where I was in that season of life, is, you know, okay, God, is you lead this. You lead this relationship. You open the doors that need to be opened. You know, help me to see if this is even somebody that I need to be with, if this is somebody you've designed for me. And I think, you know, meeting your friends is huge. And, you know, not that, I mean, even as an adult, you know, you want your friends to like the person that you're with, but a lot of times your friends can see things that you can't in the moment. And so I remember my husband David and I, before we were ever engaged, he met my best friend who was living in Maryland at the time. And that was important for him, just like it was important for me, because, you know, I knew that if there was something I didn't see, Brittany would tell me, be like, okay, I love you, but this is something I want you to be aware of. And so I think definitely, you know, having your friends weigh in on that person and just, you know, the benefit of their wisdom that where you may not see something. But I think kind of in getting over that heartbreak, I know it's going to feel like it's the end of the world. I know it's going to feel like there will never be another boy. Like there will never be another person that you're ever going to feel that way about. And I promise you that's not the case. Like I really and truly believe that when God brings somebody into your life and he brings that person into your life who he's designed to be your spouse, I don't care if you meet at 15 or 35. You know, there you will grow together. And God will show you exactly what steps to take if you allow him to do so. And I think one of the biggest things that has been successful in mine and David's relationship now is obviously, you know, there's the communication and trust and all that comes with a marriage, but it's allowing each other to be people. You know, it's allowing each other, you know, I have my days where I'm not perfect and he has to tell me to calm down, and he has his days where he's not perfect. And it's just remembering, I think there are so many people now who get into marriage with divorce as an option because they get into a fight or they have a disagreement and those are going to happen. And it's remembering that, you know, that person is just as fallible and flawed as you are.
Yeah, that's really good. So I think what really stood out to me there is like in the breakup, right after the breakup, it's going to seem like the end of the world. You might feel like the saddest you've ever been, but just hold on, you know, be patient. The Lord is still good, and there's other people out there.
Absolutely.
There's a lot of people in this world.
Yes.
You might not see them in the hallway of your high school. You might not meet them at college, but they're going to be there. If the Lord has that intended in your life, he's going to make sure that comes together, especially when you're in his will. But then for me, what I took out of that, as someone who was not experienced that, and so I know probably there's a lot of girls listening who probably haven't also experienced heartbreak. What really stood out to me is as a friend of someone who's dating, a couple girls at church the other day, we were talking, and it was like a group of 3, and one of them stopped coming to church, and I was like, oh, what happened there? Like, where is she? And they kept saying, they're like, oh, she just got a new boyfriend, and she hasn't been hanging out with us. She's always with him. She's not going to church with him. And so she missed the chance to sign up for a church camp, like our youth church camp, because she was off at church with him. They broke up like probably not that long after they've been dating, and now she couldn't go to church camp with them. And she felt isolated because she had, you know, run away. But they were like, we knew it wasn't going to happen. We tried to help her. And so I think as a friend, to watch where your intentions are as you're calling them out. You know,
right, absolutely.
Maybe they need to learn a little bit on their own, but also to tell them what you see, but out of the good of your heart and also with their intentions best. And
absolutely.
So, and their like little example ended up being silly, but she put all of her eggs in one basket. That basket tipped right over. And then she was like, oh, wait, like I left my friends for him. And now I'm this and that. And then like also one of my friends who had gone through a breakup the past year, I was able to learn a lot because from my perspective, we were seeing red flags that she wasn't quite able to see yet. And so just like being in prayer of, wait, how do we share that?
Absolutely.
I think this is a red flag, but you know him better than I do, but
absolutely
how to communicate that well. And for me personally, that was just like being in prayer. It wasn't going around and talking to our other friends, be like, hey, like, did you see this? Did you see that? To be like, no, like, we don't need to be talking about that without her there.
Right.
I need to be talking to God about it. Even my mom, like someone who is wiser than me, but it's not gossip because I'm like, you know, getting advice from my mom and then going to her and being like, hey, this worries me. Or I see this. What do you think that looks like?
Right.
And so just as a friend in that season, then also as a friend who is it with a friend who just got heartbroken, just not not to blame them. Like, you didn't see this and you didn't see this. Like,
Right.
you're so stupid. Like, why would you get in that relationship? Like, they don't need to.
Right. Not that I told you so. I tried to tell you these things.
Yeah.
I remember.
And, yeah, so silly.
I remember when I was living in Danville. So I met my best friend living in Danville. We actually worked together, and she was coming off of, she had met this guy at a church that one of our coworkers had introduced her to, and and they hit it off, but then he was really standoffish in a lot of ways, and and she got hurt in the process, and so she's married now, and she and her husband have 2 kids, and she is someone who I wholeheartly believe God designed her to be a wife and a mother.
Right.
And I remember telling her, she's like, I'm just so ready to get married. And I'm like, okay, that valid point. I'm like, but what if the person God has designed for you isn't ready yet? Because if he's not ready, then you can be ready all you want to, but it's not going to matter. And about a year and a half later, she met her now husband, Josh. And, and I got the opportunity to meet Josh pretty early on in their relationship. And they were living in Northern Virginia and had come into Danville to visit. And she and another friend of ours had tickets to go see a play or something in Raleigh. And so Josh and I got to hang out. We call it our first date.
Right. Yeah.
But it gave me an opportunity to really talk to him and get to know him. And I've told Brittany several times, and I think it's the mark of a good friend, somebody who is willing to put their relationship with that person on the line and say, look, I love you enough to tell you this. Right. And I told Brittany several times, if there had been any major red flags that I had seen about Josh, I would have told you, but I also still would have been there for you. I would have had your back. And, and again, giving that person the benefit of the doubt, maybe what I see as a red flag is something that's just their personality.
Right.
And so, it's right. You're absolutely right. It's prayerfully considering that. It's, seeking wise counsel, talking to somebody who is, familiar with that person in the situation, and just being a good friend. If it's, oh my gosh, we've talked about this guy for 37 days straight. Right. That's hard. Just keep being a good friend. Right. Be a good friend. Let them go through their grief. Let them go through those processes. And, and again, I can't stress this enough. I know it is going to feel like the end of the world, but it's not the end of the world. Right. It's not. And don't seek validation in a relationship from somebody else who you have no business being with because you're heartbroken. Right.
And if you're out, like, intentions of dating is seeking validation from that person, it's gonna not come pull through. Absolutely. You're gonna just be hurt and hurt and hurt. Your validation should be from the Lord. Your identity should be in the Lord, and then you're gonna be probably set up for a more healthy relationship. And even if your relationship is healthy, even if it seems good, there's no big red flags. Your friends love the boy, and it just isn't the right time, or isn't there, not the right circumstances. We're going to college, we're doing this, or
absolutely.
You can be heartbroken. You're like, that was the perfect person. Just still hold on. It's not going to be the end of the world.
Yeah.
And maybe he'll come back around. If it really is just this is not the right time, this is not the right season, and you both need to mature in your faith and on your own, and then you come back together in 10 years, okay, cool. And maybe, that happens sometimes too.
Yeah, absolutely.
Okay, so my next question is, how were you able to continue to go on dates after you would feel heartbroken or afraid to give your heart to somebody else after you feel like you had to just pick it up off the floor?
So I made a lot of poor decisions in trying to move on and forget relationships. Yeah. So a lot of that was, at that time I was hanging out in downtown Nashville and bars there, and bars in Murfreesboro in Middle Tennessee. Yeah. And, it was always, for me, I think it was, forget that person, forget that guy. I don't need him anyway. Right. I'm just going to go find the next random person. Right. And that's dumb. Rebounds are dumb. The rebounds are so dumb, because your heart is incredibly powerful. And if you're not careful and you're not grounded in God's word, your heart becomes more powerful than your mind. Right. And, your heart will lead you to do incredibly dumb things. Right. And, it'll chase after the wrong people. Yeah. It'll rationalize everything in the world that are red flags, but, you see it as this, well, they can't help this or they can't help that, or this is, and I think, again, like I said, I made very poor decisions in trying to move on. And, I don't know, I wrapped myself up in the hurt a lot, and just, it was, okay, who is the next person who can make me feel like this past relationship was not my fault? And so that was how I did that. And, having a little bit of, distance from that and wisdom, I can see that, one, I dated and chased after a bunch of guys I had no business being interested in. And, and I hope they're all doing well now, and I hope, their lives are successful. But just for me, in setting myself apart as a Christian, I had no business being involved in those relationships. And, we didn't hold the same things as same value of things. And I did a lot of compromising in my beliefs because wanting to be accepted and wanting to, fulfill, follow through with this relationship. And it's never going to go anywhere when those are the motivators behind it.
That's really good. And then, so how can you be purposeful and intentional in your single seasons while seeking God's will and finding a spouse?
So I'll be honest, I was perfectly happy being single. I didn't mind it. As far as my best friend Brittany was like, I got to get married, I got to have kids, I'm 24, like the door's closing. I was perfectly happy being single. And I have to tell the story just because it kind of all started here. But I had decided when I was in Danville and God got my attention, I had decided that I was done dating frivolously. That at that point, that I would be intentional and just be open to God's will. So not long after Brittany and Josh got married, I prayed what is the scariest prayer I've ever prayed. And I asked God, I said, okay, God, this is what I want. Someday I want to get married. I want to find a spouse that I can spend my life with. But if that's not what you want, I'll be single. Paul did a number of great things without ever being married. I'll be single. Just, if that's not what you want, replace the desires of my heart with yours.
Oh, that's powerful.
And so while Brittany's husband Josh was on deployment, she came in and stayed with me for a few days, and we went to a Swamp Rabbits game. I was going to say Nashville Sounds. That's not where we went. Went to a Swamp Rabbits game. So we're sitting at a hockey game. There's action. People are cheering. And we are in the middle of this deep life discussion where one or both of us were in tears at some point. And so, and this goes back to having that good friend. She looks at me and she's like, I always know when she's going to tell me something she thinks I don't want to hear. She's like, I love you, right? I'm like, yeah, dude, I love you. I know you love me. I love you too. She tells me, she's like, I think you should try online dating. You go to a church where, there aren't a lot of single guys and you don't go to bars, which that's not where you want to meet somebody anyway. I think you should do online dating. I was like, dude, online dating is for perverts and people who live in their parents' basement. Like that's not my thing. And so, she kept gently pushing, and so I gave her the very churchy answer. I said, all right, you know what? I said, I'm gonna pray about it. Let me just pray about it. And she's like, you better pray about it. Don't just tell me you're going to and then not do it. And so, and I did. I prayed about it for a few months, and so I decided, I was like, okay, I'm not gonna go like all in. So I tried, I think, Match.com, and I ended up trying Christian Mingle. So before I took that step, I actually fasted for 41 days. And again, sought God's guidance and leadership and wisdom. And I, during that time, every day I wrote out specific prayers over my husband who I didn't know yet.
That's so cool.
And I kept them all. I was like, I'm gonna keep this just in case like this leads to something or whatever. And so I fasted, and then my fast ended, and the next, I think it's the beginning of July. I was like, okay, I'm giving this a month. Like, I'm going to do online dating for a month. I'll do my due diligence. I'm not going to, and I think I met David like a week after I created my profile on Christian Mingle, and he messaged me. And so we started talking back and forth. And so I tell Brittany, I was like, hey, by the way, I'm going on a date with a guy that I met online. I know you're in California, but just keep an eye on my location in case I don't come home.
Right.
And, in case I get abducted or something.
Right, because we're online, yeah.
And so we went out the first time, and I remember even telling Brittany before, I was like, I said, first dates are so dumb and they're awkward and I don't like them. I said, I just want the first person I talk to, that's who I'm going to marry. And she's like, that's not how that happens. I'm like, it does sometimes.
So maybe it might for me.
Yeah, I was like, it does sometimes. I said, you need to just pray over that.
Right.
So I met David and we went on our first date. And while we were on our first date, he asked me on our second date. And I think our second date, we both knew that was it. And and we have faced a lot, in our 3 years we've been married, because we got married in 2020, right as COVID's happening, and we've seen a lot, and we've dealt with a lot. Blended families are never easy, but I thank God every day that He opened my eyes and showed me how to do this whole relationship thing, and made it possible for us to meet, and and put people in my life that were willing to speak truth and just and make suggestions. And and it's funny, I didn't know this at the time, obviously, because I'm writing out these prayers, and there were several of them that those were things David was struggling with.
Really, that's so cool.
So I ended up, I saved all of those and gave those to him the day before we got married.
That's precious.
So it just, I don't know, it was God's providence and all of that. I mean,
Yeah, that's so cool. I didn't know that, but I love hearing people's stories, and then now, I'm like, oh wow, that's so cool. That makes sense. That's all the things. So that's really cool. So just being in that season of singleness, just be in prayer, be praying for God's will, be praying for your heart to desire His will, to desire His plan.
Absolutely.
And be have your heart almost prepared for it not be what you planned for. In my head, it's this is what I'm going to get married, and this is how many kids I'm going to have, and this is the order. And then it's wait, no, that's not how that goes. So just being in prayer, wait, Lord, soften my heart in that.
Absolutely.
And then give me the peace of what your plan is better.
Absolutely.
Romans 15:13 says, may the God of hope fill you with all joy and peace as you trust in Him, so that may overfill with hope by the power of the Holy Spirit. And so just if you're feeling so lonely after heartbreak, and this is all I want to talk to, this is the only person who I know how to talk to, you get to talk to God, and He's the one who will fill you with joy and peace and hope when you trust in Him. So thank you for coming on today.
Oh, thank you for having me.
And being vulnerable. I really appreciate it.
Anytime.
Yes. And I'll see you guys next Tuesday. Bye.